studio lights hit like noon sun as Stephanie Mills steps onto Sherri Shepherd's set, smiling wide but moving with that calm, legendary confidence. The band taps out a quick celebratory riff, the audience rises, and Sherri greets her with big energy. Stephanie hugs her, waves to the crowd, and settles into the chair like she's done this 1,000 times because she has. Everything feels warm, safe, friendly. A broken bar right up until the first "so let's talk about a broken bar" lands a little too sharp. Sherri starts with praisey career highlights, iconic songs, timeless vocals, and Stephanie nods graciously, tossing in a few quick jokes that relax the room. The audience laughs. Producers in the control booth exhale. Sherri leans forward, excited, and says today is about real talk too. Stephanie's smile holds, but her eyes narrow just a touch, like she's already sensing the interview might be steering into a place she didn't sign up for. The conversation shifts from music to headlines, and the tone changes by degrees. Sherri tries to keep it playful, but the questions become more pointed, phrased like prompts from a trending list. Stephanie answers politely at first, careful and measured, refusing to take bait. She repeats a few times that she's here to talk about work, legacy, and what she's building now. The audience claps at that. For a moment, it seems like the show will pivot back. Instead, Sherri brings up an old comment Stephanie made years ago as something that's been clipped, reposted, and reinterpreted online. The screen behind them flashes a quote graphic. Stephanie's posture changes, shoulders square, chin lifts. She says, calmly, that context matters. Sherri insists she's only asking because people want to know. Stephanie replies, people can want a lot of things. The room laughs nervously, not sure if it's a joke. Sherri pushes again, asking if Stephanie regrets how she said it. Stephanie doesn't blink. She says she regrets that media turns grown women into clickbait. Sherri smiles tightly, trying to keep the mood light, but her follow-up lands like a challenge. So you're saying you didn't mean it? Stephanie answers, I meant what I meant, and I meant it in the full conversation and not the little piece you put on that screen. The audience reacts to some cheers, some surprised murmurs. Sherri's eyes flick to the producers, then back to Stephanie. She says she isn't trying to ambush her, but Stephanie's tone says she doesn't buy it. Stephanie adds that she agreed to an interview, not a courtroom cross-examination. Sherri laughs, but it's the kind of laugh that's meant to shrink tension. Stephanie doesn't soften. The band stays quiet. Sherri pivots to something personal, family, relationships, and a rumor about a long-standing feud. Stephanie immediately says she won't discuss private lives or manufactured beef. Sherri counters that it's not manufactured if it's in the blogs. Stephanie replies, if it's in the blogs, it's probably sponsored. A few audience members whoop. Sherri's smile fades for a second, then returns bigger, brighter, like a mask. Sherri tries to reframe, I'm just asking what everyone's asking. Stephanie answers, then everyone can keep asking. Sherri's voice rises slightly, still friendly but firmer, saying interviews are about honesty. Stephanie says honesty also includes boundaries, and boundaries are not disrespect. The room's energy tilts. A camera operator adjusts position, sensing something is happening. In the control room, someone likely whispers, we're live here, be careful. Sherri mentions ratings and how viewers love when guests get candid. Stephanie's eyebrows lift as she hears what that means. She says she didn't come to be a moment, she came to be a message. Sherri claps, half supportive, half performative, and says, okay, message us they know what's the truth? Stephanie replies, the truth is I'm not here to be handled. That line lands heavy. Sherri tries to laugh it off again, but Stephanie's voice becomes quieter, sharper. She explains that legendary women are often invited onto shows only to be poked, prodded, and packaged into a viral clip. She says she's done decades of work, and she refuses to let one segment reduce her to a headline. Some audience members applaud loudly. Sherri looks irritated now, though she keeps her tone host warm. Sherri says she respects Stephanie, but the audience deserves clarity. Stephanie repeats, respect means listening the first time. Sherri asks one more time about the feud. Stephanie stares at her, then looks out at the audience and says she loves them, but she won't play this game. Sherri says, it's not a game. Stephanie answers, Then why does it feel like a trap? The room goes silent, and that way studios don't. No casual chatter, no rustle, just there. Sherri shifts in her chair, leaning forward, and says she's not trapping her, she's doing her job. Stephanie nods. And I'm doing Minia, protecting my name. Sherri says Stephanie is being defensive. Stephanie says she's being wise. Both speak over each other for a second, polite words with sharp edges. Sherri references another celebrity who answered the same question last week. Stephanie responds, I'm not that celebrity. Sherri presses, why not just clear it up? Stephanie counters, because clearing it up for you means feeding it for them. The audience reacts again. Sherri's face shows a flicker of frustration, the kind that comes when a host loses control of the segment pacing. A producer's voice slightly crackles through Sherri's earpiece. Sherri nods subtly, then tries a softer approach, saying she admires Stephanie's strength. Stephanie says strength is being able to say no without being labeled difficult. Sherri says no one's labeling her difficult. Stephanie replies, not with words or broken bar but with tone. That stings. Sherri's voice tightens, I'm just talking. Stephanie leans in, finally matching Sherri's intensity. She says she's been in this business long enough to recognize when a host is setting up a gotcha moment. She says she won't be edited into something ugly. Sherri insists the show doesn't do that. Stephanie smiles slightly and says, your screen behind me already did. A low gasp ripples across the audience. Sherri waves her hand like, come on, and claims it's a standard graphic. Stephanie says standard doesn't mean respectful. Sherri says she's giving Stephanie a platform. Stephanie replies, a platform isn't a favor when I'm the one bringing the history. That's when the audience splits, as some clap hard, others sit stiff, sensing the interview has become a standoff. Sherri tries to redirect towards Stephanie's current projects, tour dates, new music, inspiration. Stephanie answers those quickly, almost like she's proving she came prepared to promote. But Sherri can't resist circling back. She asks, lightly, so you're not going to address it at all? Stephanie's smile disappears. She says, I already addressed it. You just didn't like the answer. Sherri exhales and says, okay, but don't be mad at me. Stephanie replies, I'm not mad. I'm disappointed. That's worse than anger. Sherri's cheeks flush. She tries to pivot again. Let's do a fun game. But the energy is too far gone. Stephanie says she doesn't feel like playing games. Sherri's tone snaps slightly. It's a daytime show. Stephanie responds, then act like it. The audience makes a collective oh. Sherri's eyes widen, then narrow. She says Stephanie is being unfair. Stephanie says unfair is inviting someone to celebrate them and then dragging them into mess. Sherri says she didn't create the mess. Stephanie says she's feeding it. Sherri says she's asking questions. Stephanie sits back, folds her hands, and speaks slowly. She says interviews can uplift or exploit, and today it feels like exploitation. Sherri denies it again. Stephanie says denial doesn't change impact. Sherri says impact isn't her intention. Stephanie replies, intent doesn't erase harm. A producer in the back signals something, a maybe wrap it, maybe break soon. Sherri tries to regain warmth. Stephanie, I love you. Stephanie nods. Then love me correctly. That line gets loud applause. Sherri smiles tightly and says, so what do you want me to do? Stephanie says, respect the boundaries I stated before we started. Sherri looks surprised, as if this is new information. Stephanie implies it was discussed with staff. Sherri says she never heard about any boundaries. Stephanie says that's not her problem, and it's exactly why guests get frustrated. The messages don't reach the host, but the guest gets blamed. Sherri looks toward the control room as if to say, did you tell me? The pause is long. The audience feels it. Stephanie's gaze stays steady, unbothered. Sherri turns back and says, well, we're here now. Stephanie says yes, and she's choosing peace. Sherri laughs awkwardly. Peace on my show? Stephanie replies, peace anywhere I stand. Sherri attempts one more question about the rumor. Stephanie raises a hand, not aggressive, just final. Number. Sherri starts to speak again. Stephanie repeats, number. That repetition flips a switch. Sherri's voice rises, but the viewer says. Stephanie cuts in, still calm, the viewers can handle a grown woman saying number. Sherri says, You're walking out, Stephanie answers. If that's what it takes. The band remains silent. The camera zooms slightly, capturing the moment Stephanie shifts forward in her seat. Stephanie stands, not dramatically or deliberately. She smooths her outfit, turns to the audience, and thanks them for the love over the years. Some people stand up clapping, others look stunned. Sherri stands too, half reaching out, saying, wait, don't do that. Stephanie looks at Sherri and says, I'm doing what you asked me to do, be honest. Sherri tries to laugh it into a friendly ending, but her eyes look frustrated. She says she didn't mean for Stephanie to feel attacked. Stephanie says intentions aside, she did. She adds that she refuses to be a clip, a meme, a trend. She says her legacy is bigger than a viral argument. The audience applause gets louder, like they're sending her out with respect. Sherri says, so you're just leaving? Stephanie nods. Yes. Sherri says, okay, well, a broken bar, and looks toward the camera, unsure whether to follow her or keep hosting. Stephanie walks toward the edge of the set. A staffer appears off camera, guiding her path. The camera tries to keep the shot composed, but the energy is chaotic beneath the polished surface. Sherri calls after her, we can talk backstage. Stephanie pauses for half a second, then says, without turning fully, that's where we should have talked first. Then she continues walking. The audience is buzzing now. Some clap, some whisper, some gasp. Sherri returns to her mark, forcing a smile, but it's clear she's rattled. The show goes to a quick break, maybe earlier than planned. Sherri faces the camera and says something like, we'll be right back, in a voice that's trying to sound normal. The band plays a brief transition sting, too upbeat for what just happened. Offstage, producers scramble, damage control, PR notes, what to post, what not to post. After the break, Sherri lightly addresses it carefully, saying she respects Stephanie and never intended conflict, while viewers immediately flood social media with reactions. Clips would trend, opinions would polarize, and headlines would spin it either as a walk-off or a boundary moment. But in the quiet truth of it, the scene becomes a reminder, some legends won't be baited, and sometimes the most dramatic thing a person can do on TV is simply stand up and leave. Backstage, the hallway feels colder than the bright studio. Stephanie walks with purpose, not rushing, not trembling, just done. A staffer offers water, another apologizes softly, and someone from booking tries to explain that the graphic and questions were standard. Stephanie stops, turns, and says standard is exactly the problem. She reminds them she agreed to celebrate her work, not relive internet arguments. Her voice isn't loud, but it's unshakable, and that steadiness makes the scramble around her look even messier. In the control room, monitors replay the moment she stood up, and one frame frozen on Sherri's surprised face. Producers speak in clipped sentences, cut that clip, no, keep it. What's the angle? A social media coordinator asks whether they should post a teaser. Someone higher up says not yet. Another says the audience will post it anyway. The debate becomes less about what happened and more about how fast it will spread, and that's exactly what Stephanie warned about on the couch. Sherri, still on set, tries to regain her rhythm. She reads the teleprompter, but her eyes don't fully match the smile. The next segment begins, yet the audience is distracted, whispering and checking phones. Sherri's comedian instincts kick and she drops a quick joke to lighten the air. A few people laugh, but the sound is thinner than before. The show is moving forward, but everyone can feel the dent in the day's feel-good promise. Meanwhile, Stephanie's manager reaches her near the dressing room corridor. He asks if she wants to return and smooth it out. Stephanie shakes her head. She says smoothing it out on camera would turn her boundary into a negotiation, and she's not negotiating. She says she's not angry, she's protecting the version of herself that survived the industry. She's tired of being invited as royalty and treated like content. Her manager nods. He's heard versions of the story too many times. A junior producer approaches with a rehearsed apology. Stephanie listens, then asks one simple question: who approved the quote graphic? The producer hesitates. That hesitation answers more than words. Stephanie says, gently, that the problem isn't one person, it's a machine that rewards conflict. She tells them she's not here to punish anyone, but she won't participate. She steps away before the conversation can turn into a pleading session. On Sherri's side, an executive producer suggests a post-break statement, short, kind, non-defensive. Another suggests ignoring it to avoid fueling the story. Sherri chooses a middle road as she acknowledges Stephanie's feelings and says she respects her. But even as she says it, her tone carries that subtle sting of being embarrassed on her own stage. Viewers later will debate whether Sherri sounded sincere or strategic, and both sides will feel certain. Online, the clip hits before the show even ends. A fan account posts shaky footage from the audience. Stephanie standing, thanking people, walking off. Captions vary, some say walk off, others say humiliated host, others saw Queen set boundaries. The comments explode into teams, Team Stephanie, Team Sherri, and Team Nobody, who just hates drama. The algorithm doesn't care who's right, but only cares that people stop scrolling. A radio host reposts the clip with a hot take, framing it like a scandal. A musician reposts it with one word, "respecta," and that one word shifts the tone for thousands of people. A therapist account stitches it into a lesson about boundaries. A gossip page turns it into a feud storyline. The same 30 seconds becomes 4 different realities depending on who is narrating it. Stephanie's point about being edited into something ugly proves itself in real time. The next morning, entertainment sites build headlines from assumptions. Insiders saw a broken bar, sources claim a broken bar. No one truly knows what was agreed to before the interview, but the internet fills in blanks with confidence. Some claim Stephanie refused to answer simple questions. Others claim Sherri tried to humiliate a legend for ratings. Stephanie's fans post old interviews showing her calm, thoughtful style. Sherri's fans post clips showing her friendly hosting. Each side tries to prove character with evidence. Sherri's team schedules a meeting. They review segment notes, booking emails, and pre-interview calls. Someone insists boundaries were never communicated. Someone else finds a message that suggests they were. The truth is buried in workflow and miscommunication, which is less exciting than a feud, so it gets ignored publicly. They craft talking points anyway. We value guests. We respect legends. We're learning. It's crisis language, polished and safe. Stephanie, on the other hand, stays quiet. She doesn't jump on live video to rant. She doesn't post a dramatic thread. Her silence frustrates people who want more content, but her silence also keeps her from being dragged into the cycle. Her team releases a brief statement: gratitude to fans, love for the host, firm stance on boundaries. It's calm enough to sound classy, clear enough to sound strong. It becomes a model statement for others. A week later, another show invites Stephanie. Their producer calls her manager and says, "We'll keep it strictly about your work." Stephanie agrees, but with one condition: no surprise graphics, no rumor questions, no bait. The producer says yes quickly because now they've seen what happens when you don't. That's the hidden impact of walk-offs. They train the industry, not with shouting, but with consequences. In a different corner of the conversation, people start asking why women, especially older black women, are expected to be endlessly gracious even while being poked. Commentators discuss how diva gets used to punish boundaries. Others push back, saying hosts must ask tough questions. Both points can exist, but the online debate rarely allows nuance. Nuance doesn't trend. Outrage does. Stephanie becomes a symbol, whether she asked for that job or not. Sherri watches the conversation unfold like anyone would, a phone in hand, notifications buzzing. She sees clips that cut out her compliments and only keep the tension. She sees edits that add dramatic music and reaction memes. She feels misunderstood, and that feeling hardens. In private, she may admit she pushed too far. In public, she can't say that without looking weak, so she chooses controlled statements, and the internet reads control as coldness. Months later, the moment becomes a reference point. People say, pull a Stephanie Mills, meaning, stand up, set the boundary, exit politely. It's quoted in podcasts, in green room conversations, in PR trainings. New artists take notes. Hosts take notes too. Some adjust their approach, some double down, insisting drama is necessary. But even those who double down now know a guest can refuse the script. And if you look closely at the original moment, The loudest part wasn't the argument, it was the shift of the second Stephanie realized the interview wasn't the celebration. You could see the calculation: do I stay and get reshaped into a headline, or do I leave and own my narrative? That's why the clip hit people so hard. Not because it was messy, because it was a decision, made in real time, by someone who's tired of being turned into entertainment. In the end, the story isn't just about a walk-off. It's about a culture that confuses access with entitlement. Viewers feel entitled to explanations. Hosts feel entitled to answers. Platforms feel entitled to moments. And guests, especially legends, are expected to endure it with a smile. Stephanie's exit breaks that expectation. She didn't flip a table. She didn't curse. She simply withdrew consent. That's a quiet kind of power. For Sherri, the lesson is complicated. She built a reputation on warmth, relatability, and humor, and moments like this threatened that brand. She may tell herself she was just doing her job. She may genuinely feel she was. But the job also includes reading the room, and the room read differently than her plan. If she grows from it, she'll tighten her pre-interview communication. If she doesn't, she'll chase the next viral moment and risk repeats. For Stephanie, the lesson is simpler: protect your peace before you protect the show's pacing. Her career lasted because she learned when to sing, when to speak, and when to step away. A walk-off is never ideal, but sometimes it's the cleanest ending to a conversation that stopped being respectful. She didn't abandon the audience, she honored them by not performing conflict for them. And for everyone watching, the final takeaway depends on what you value. If you value tea, you'll say it was dramatic. If you value dignity, you'll say it was necessary. But one thing is undeniable: after that moment, nobody could pretend the tension wasn't there. The mask slipped, the machine showed itself, and a legend reminded the industry that respect isn't a request, it's a requirement. As the dust settles, analysts begin dissecting the interview frame by frame, noting how pacing, camera cuts, and on-screen graphics can quietly steer a conversation. Media professors point out that daytime shows often balance warmth with provocation, and when that balance tips, trust erodes fast. Stephanie's walk-off becomes a case study in classrooms and workshops, not as spectacle, but as a moment where a guest reclaimed agency in an environment designed to keep things moving no matter the cost. Fans who grew up with Stephanie's music share stories about what her songs meant to them during hard seasons. They connect those memories to her decision to leave, saying the same voice that carried them through now spoke up for self-respect. These posts spread slower than outrage, but they linger longer. They remind people that public figures aren't just characters in a feed, they're humans with histories, limits, and the right to draw lines. Advertisers quietly pay attention too. Brands don't like unpredictability, but they like integrity even more. Some see Stephanie's stance as risky, others see it as alignment with values audiences increasingly demand. Meetings happen where marketers ask, what do our viewers actually want? The answer isn't just drama, it's authenticity without cruelty. The industry begins to feel a subtle shift, like a tide turning a degree at a time. Sherri's show books another high-profile guest weeks later, and the interview is noticeably gentle. Compliments linger longer, tough questions are framed with context, and boundaries are clarified on air. Viewers comment that it feels old school in a good way. Whether intentional or coincidental, the tone change fuels speculation. People wonder if the lesson stuck. The show doesn't address it directly, but the absence of friction speaks louder than a statement. Stephanie returns to the stage on tour, greeted by standing ovations that feel warmer than usual. Between songs, she thanks the audience for allowing her to be herself, and no explanation, no recap. The applause suggests they understand. In that space, away from studio lights and viral edits, the relationship feels honest again. Music does what interviews sometimes can't. It lets emotion breathe without interruption. Comment sections eventually cool, replaced by new controversies and fresh clips. But the face-setter boundary keeps popping up, echoing Stephanie's calm insistence. Influencers repurpose it, brands print it on merch, and therapists nod knowingly. What started as a tense TV moment becomes part of everyday language. That's the strange alchemy of culture, how one refusal can ripple outward into permission for others. Years from now, Retrospectives will flatten the moment into a headline, but those who watched closely will remember the details. The pause before Stephanie stood, the way the room changed, the respect in her goodbye. They'll remember that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers no and stands firm. In an industry that runs on yeses, that whisper can be revolutionary. Sherri continues hosting, evolving as all long-running hosts must. She sharpens her instincts, listens harder to her team, and perhaps to herself. The job remains complicated, a balancing curiosity with care, candor with kindness. If growth happens, it will be incremental and mostly invisible, measured not by apologies but by fewer moments that require them. Stephanie's legacy, already secure, gains a new layer. She becomes not just a voice of a generation, but a model for how to age in public without shrinking. Younger artists cite her when negotiating interviews. Veterans quietly thank her for saying what they didn't. Legacy, after all, isn't only about what you create out, it's about what you protect. The audience learns something too. Viewers begin to question why they expect access to every thought, every feud, every private corner of a public life. Some realize curiosity can cross into entitlement. Others decide they prefer conversations that illuminate rather than inflame. These shifts don't trend, but they matter. They shape what survives beyond the scroll. In the end, the studio returns to normal. Lights reset, chairs are placed, cues are called, another episode tapes, another story unfolds. But the echo of that walk-off lingers, like a reminder etched into the floor. Respect isn't optional, even when the cameras are rolling. Especially then. If the moment had ended differently, if Stephanie had stayed, laughed it off, played it longer, the clip might have been louder but emptier. By leaving, she created space for reflection. She traded immediate approval for long-term clarity. That trade is rare in a media economy addicted to instant reaction. And that rarity is why it resonated. People will argue forever about who was right. Those arguments miss the point. The point is that consent can be withdrawn, even mid-conversation. The point is that dignity doesn't require permission. Once those ideas enter the mainstream, they don't leave easily. They wait, ready, for the next person who needs them. So the story settles into its true shape, not a scandal, not a feud, but a boundary drawn in daylight. A line that says celebration should not come with conditions, and respect should not be negotiated on air. That line, once seen, can't be unseen. And that's how a single decision, made in a few quiet seconds, outlives the segment it interrupted. Not as chaos, but as clarity. Not as noise, but as a signal. In a world that often rewards staying at any cost, Stephanie Mills chose to leave, and in doing so, she stayed true to herself.